Welcome to Cyber Power of Tigray Media Show. This is Ephraim, and I have Dr. Ryan and also Miki Tigray today with me. We are going to talk about the impact of genocide today in Tigray, and the war in Horn Africa is with a lot of things that we have, especially focusing on mental issues. We're going to focus uh, on mental issue because we have today some specialists who are Dr. Ryan is actually a psychologist who's been working with vulnerable people in Washington State and very experienced. So we want to talk about this detail. Welcome, Dr. Ryan.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me again. It's truly an honor. I mean, to be on once was special. To be on two times, didn't expect it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mike, welcome, Mike. Mike is also the host of Cyber Power of Tigray Media English program, actually. I'm just trying to help him today to host since he's been talking about Tigrinya instead of English most of the time. So his Tigrinya is better than his English now. He's forgetting English. Anyways, welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Ephraim. Good to see you, Dr. Quirk, once again. And obviously, we just briefly touched on the war that's happening in the Tigray region of Ethiopia with a foreign military involved from Eritrea and possibly facing a severe man-made famine and the impact of the mental health, as Ephraim mentioned. And since your specialty is dealing with mental health crisis and whatnot, the hope is for us to have some basic understanding of sharing our viewers from the entire Horn of Africa, for that matter, what it means to them when atrocities are taking place and people are under siege due to war that has been heading to the end of the 23rd month and approaching almost 2 years, coming November 4th of next month, obviously. So I know it's been over a month since we saw you last, but obviously it has intensified now with Eritrea's human wave style, which I believe has been tried once in the past, but the war has elevated where the stress level of children in Tigray has not gone to school for a number of years. Surely and slowly are dying from just simple lack of medicine, the various things that we'll be talking about. So we're hoping for to hear from you, the impact of war and mental health crisis, and people also that are already suffering from mental illness, from depression, anxiety, but also those who have gone through this kind of war in the past. I was born into it, as I mentioned to you, on the last discussion that we had. So for me, it's living this thing again. And Ephraim actually had served in the military when he was back home in the prior war also. So somehow many of us have one way or another impact from a prior war, and it's happening right now again. So anyway, but I just want to kind of give a glimpse of it. But welcome, good to see you again, both.
Okay, so it's your time, Dr. Ryan. What's the impact of the genocide in general? You can give us some kind of hint, especially our community. They need to know about the impact and the psychological impact of the genocide war right now. Especially the war is going on for the last almost 3 years now, almost 3 years, next November. Thank you.
Yes, since as Mike mentioned, it was just over a month ago that I had the privilege of being on your show, and since that time, I have been routinely checking the news for signs of improvement, especially after hearing you both share personal stories of not just the past, but the present in terms of how this is affecting you and your families in the present tense, and also hearing and seeing in some of the chats and some of the questions, some of your viewers pleading for some some advice and some suggestions on ways of trying to make an impact, raise awareness, cope with a situation that really, from the trickle of information that comes out, really sounds horrendous. And as Mike touched on, there a human-generated famine and combined with lack of access, as I understand it, to medications, basic medications. And then the other piece that Mike touched on was what I think about as far as children in that situation, not going to school, maybe not likely having their basic needs met. And in the United States for the past couple of years, it was not a genocide. There has been a pandemic due to COVID-19, and there has been much attention paid in contrast to the atrocities that you've described. There's been a focus, some of it belated, but still focused nonetheless on children's mental health in the United States in response to the pandemic. And some of that includes not being in school on a regular basis for a distinct period of time during the pandemic, with some of school operations going back to normal just this year for a number of districts, and also children's response and trying to make sense and understand what's going on, and anxiety around the pandemic itself and the illness, concerns about getting sick, seeing others get sick. And so again, those are not genocidal conditions, but there has been that focus on mental health. And famously, I would say, since there's been, again, a lot of attention paid to it, it's now known that the wait times to access mental health care in the United States of America are quite long. There's a prolonged period of time. There's a wait list. There's a backlog. And so some of my response to your question, Ephraim, is that it stands to reason that for this particular genocidal event, we still don't know what the effects are. And some of that could be by design as far as the information that is not coming out of that region. And like I'm suggesting, perhaps intentionally, because some of those stories, any images, either pictures or moving images, could be quite impactful. And that so far is not what I've seen in some of the news accounts. And again, I think that might be perhaps on purpose, so that awareness can't be raised or it becomes harder. It is known from past genocides, including in Rwanda, including in the Darfur region, but also going back to World War II, which was something that we touched on last time I had the opportunity to be on the show, that there is research to suggest that the effects of a genocide and that situation can have impacts that extend generationally, right? So that it doesn't just impact those that are experiencing it, that are seeing it, but also their children and their children's children in some cases.
I would like to hear from Mike too, your intake about the impact of the genocide, especially Mike, when you're young, the war with Mengistu Haile Mariam was very bad, and then he had to leave the country when you were little. Then you migrate from Tigray to Sudan, and from Sudan to United States of America. So you were lucky, so you came here and you were able to continue your education. But the impact was already, a lot of Tigrayans were died on the way coming, moving to Sudan. And as you know, there is a lot of communicable disease on your way, like malaria is an issue. The natural disaster was an issue. Famine was an issue. There is a lot of things that you can mention. So, from your experience, what's the impact of the genocide war? What about the war in general on your lifetime?
Sure. Well, just kind of, Dr. Corky, he talked about the Darfur, the Rwanda. I think, for me, like I sometimes would wake up thinking this is not for real, but then it is for real, right? I was born into the civil war in Ethiopia, the Tigray region, back in the 80s when heavy fighting was taking place. Supposedly the Eritrean and the Tigrayans fighting side by side, but it was, you know, I don't know, looking back now, reflecting that there was a genuine partnership in that fight, because I remember, from Tigray, part of the Tigrayan fighters who try to help many of us to cross into the Sudan as refugees. I recall the Eritrean military then, it is now the most dictator regime in the Horn of Africa, second to North Korea. We lost 1.2 million people back in the mid 80s, particularly the 1984 famine that the world have become to know about Ethiopia. So I was among those people who struggled to make it through, and I did. I was lucky, like Ephraim say, obviously, but no child should have to go through that. It was not by choice, but it was by force. But watching Eritrean then military to have this, I would call it, like an American terminology, cold heart, to have children and women and elderly being blocked from entering into Sudan, only to cross over so then they can have food and water, and to see them, like suffer and die. And some of us somehow made it, like, through that agony is, it's painful, right? And so to then relive through that in itself is, it's devastating. I was, to an extent, lucky enough, living many years in California and getting through the process, having tremendous people supporting me, and going to college here in the University of Oregon, obviously where I graduated, and looking into psychology and sociology, and just the process to relive through this, and going back to the Sudan last year to see those children and families and women and men who suffer an agony, to walk for so many days without food and water. And, when you talk about these stories for people who haven't lived it, it might be frightening, but when you live through it, you question the world. Does the world really care about humanity, right? And, so we don't have to even make this politic. It's just from the humanitarian aspect of it. Why is it that nearly every time there's crisis in Africa, the international community, the United Nations, doesn't seem to wake up? But Americans in particular, at this gesture right now, 6 months ago, Russia attacked Ukraine. Most Americans know about the Ukraine, including children in schools. But when it comes to the Tigray, nearly over roughly 8 million people under siege for nearly 2 years now. Next month will be exact 2 years, actually. So for me, when I put everything together, it's an ugly history of a second time a man-made famine in the Horn of Africa, that millions are suffering, and the United States and other powerful countries are just simply giving us lip service, saying we are concerned. And concern is different than taking action, and it wouldn't have to be a military action. The U.S. and other rich countries like the NATO countries could simply just impose a arms embargo, for example, and that was severe. A lot of the fighting that's happening in that horn, and I think it would bring the war into an end, so that people can just simply. And also, lastly, I'll say, dropping food and medicine to the heavily impacted area. It's not that complicated, particularly dropping foods. That is another thing that the U.S. we've been begging for, and they're not willing to do, to drop food for people who are starving to death.
I mean, Mike, that's such a powerful story, and I think that's a great question, Ephraim, and I was hoping that you'd be able to speak to that, Mike. And when I listen to that, what I hear is that there's layers. The focus on the humanitarian aspect is quite right. But on top of that, what I'm also hearing is that as a survivor, whereas others may not have made it, could carry its own weight, as could the compounding element of any kind of message that you detect by inaction, right? So that if there has been responses in Kosovo, and responses and the knowledge widespread and all the discussions and all the media attention on the Ukraine, what message is that sending you? And then internalizing that's powerful, because I mean the humanitarian crisis would be just so intense on its own right, but now it sounds like it's being compounded by these other factors as well.
Absolutely, and that's the hard part, because I know like millions of Americans are good if they're told the story, they would rise up and they will help. But I think coming to this country young, I'm blessed, and don't get me wrong, I love this country. There's many opportunities still, but it really breaks my heart that our government in this country, that it's just the drones, for example, that have been utilized in Tigray, the software. There's a company in Canada and the U.S. that supplies those to Turkey, and then Turkey uses drones to kill our family. But also, U.S. is the biggest arms supplier to the United Arab Emirates, which also is a country who started the actual drone attack in Tigray. And on a regular basis, as we speak to you today, number of cities and villages in Tigray are just indiscriminately like bombed by Eritrea, that now is being fully funded and supported by Ethiopia. So like I would like you to kind of put it. I want to ask you actually a quick question on as an American, like you get to vote for a governor to run the state of Washington for 4 years, and the federal government says we don't like that, so bring Canada, the whole nation, and blocks the state of Washington 360 degree, and you can't have food, medicine, whatever you have to survive through yourself for 23 months. So I want people to imagine, to go through these atrocities in America. We'll call, if your government or individuals bring an outside forces, we call that espionage. In Ethiopia, that's precisely what's happening from the military aspect of it. But for the humanitarian aspect of it, as I mentioned earlier, is that why should millions, I'm talking millions of people, have to suffer as a result of the inaction? And and that's where the hard part for me is, America doesn't need to send like troops to Ethiopia. They don't, but they have the power of the pen. They can put like visa sanctions. They can put military sanctions, the fundings. The IMF is still funding Ethiopia for this war. I mean, millions of dollars still are given to Ethiopia, and Ethiopia is using that money to buy these drones. So this is where the painfuls are, where the international community's failure to act on the humanitarian aspect of it is painful.
Yeah, and I can tell from both of your reactions and just incredulity around this situation that it must astound you as to how little is being done right now, but also on top of that, how little is known. And I must admit that I would count myself among those who, until Ephraim contacted me and discussed this opportunity to meet with you, I would count myself among those that did not know the extent, did not know the duration, did not know all of the women and children and other humanitarian aspects of this that was all drawn into this. And I think some of it comes down to something you touched on last time, Mike, which is just quite frankly race. Where as far as some of the other events that we've mentioned over the course of this live stream and the previous one, such as Kosovo and then the Ukraine-Russian conflict, are white, a white population, predominantly white population, as compared to some of the other atrocities and the noticeable and painful delays in and around the Horn of Africa and the very situation that we're talking about right now. And I stand affirm that most Americans could not point to the Tigray region on a map at this point. And it's not discussed in the same ways that as far as like the Ukraine-Russian conflict being tied up with oil and gas and wheat and other aspects that have generated in addition to race, that it's been repeatedly on the front page, repeatedly at the top of the line, whereas any information on Tigray is further down the list. You have to search for it in terms of media.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan. Thank you, Mike. One thing that always American people needs to know, when I ask you one question, I want those the entire American people. I know we are Americans, and we are, when we take the citizenship, we have to know certain things. We cannot betray our country. I cannot betray my country, America. I'm already American, but I'm born in Tigray, and I'm Tigrayan American. So I'm always concerned about my root, about my people. But when I think about this prime minister, I'm gonna ask you, what do you know about Tigray now? When I ask you that, that question is for most of our people, our American people, especially people who are born here. Most of the time, I wanted to know if a lot of people knows what's going on in Tigray. So my question is directly, what do you know exactly what's happening right now in Tigray? I'm going to show you a little bit of video after he said something, because there is a country, Tigray is part of Ethiopia, right? And the war is going on with the different, with the help of different country, and there is a lot of things that if you know, and if other Americans knows what's going on. Thank you.
Awkward for me to try to speak for most Americans, but if I can stand in as a average American, you know, I think I would most directly respond to your question as saying, no, I do not believe that most Americans know what's going on in Tigray. Period. I do not believe that that's the case. In other words, I think it would be news to most people, unfortunately, going back to a previous question and outlining how this, for myriad reasons, has not been receiving the attention that it so desperately needs. My understanding currently, and I defer to you both, who I'm sure are more informed than I am. I've relied, like, as I mentioned, on trying to keep up with the news and information ever since you afforded me the opportunity to be on your show. And so the last time I heard, unfortunately, very unfortunately, instead of the situation improving, the media that I found was highlighting that Eritrea was calling up all women and men 40 and over, and I understand it's even gone from around 60, 65 to 70 years old to enlist anyone in this conflict to reinforce this blockade. So yes, instead of the circumstances improving, it seems like it's become more intractable, unfortunately.
Okay.
I'm going to second that, actually, to your, sorry, Ephraim. I'm going to second that, Dr. Quirk, about the American. I have traveled the United States from West Coast, East Coast, Midwest, name it all. I have participated in leading many protests for the past 23 months. As such, I can tell you that by far the majority of Americans, and sadly, even American elected officials, our politicians, know almost nothing or very little about Tigray. So I know you didn't feel comfortable, speaking on behalf of the American people, but as your fellow American myself, and who has been the activist and advocate of this atrocity to my ethnicity in Ethiopia, it's very, very unfortunate, which is why I often contain my emotions. But it hurts me to know that you touch bases where whenever there's crisis in Europe, we are very quick. We, meaning America, is very quick to respond. And then when it comes to my Africans, where my ancestors, where I come from, it really, really it hurts to know that even the American media, how little they do coverage-wise when it comes to the Tigray, and it is considered the deadliest war as we speak in 2022. So we're going to show this video. This is regarding, mentally disturbed, Tigrayans who are suffering as a result of the current war that we're talking about.
Okay, great. So I'm going to show you. This is a mental health center in Tigray. It was owned by one individual person. And in this mental health center, you can see a different kind of mental health disorders. You can see people with schizophrenia, people with depression. Some of them are very manic. Some of them are post-traumatic stress disorder. All mental case issues in one hall. Right before this war, they had regular meal, regular medications. Right now, they don't have no medication. They don't have no regular meal. They don't even know anyone to help them take a shower or just the regular basic things. It's very disturbing, but I wanted to see this so you can tell us more about what you can think. What's going on?
በቃ ክርስቲያን እስላም እዩ ገለይ ተይብልና ሃይማኖት ብሄር ተይክልና እና ሰና መጀመርያ አትዩና እዩ ወድሕሩ ላወዝሑ መፅዮም በቃ ላወዝሑ መፅኡ ተለው ካብ ዓቕምና ብላዕሊ ኮይኖም ማለት እዩ ዓቕምና ብላዕሊ ኮይኖም በቃ ህዝ ግን ምስቱ ታይስሙ ምዃኑ ምስቱ ዕፅዋ ይኩባ ምዃኑ ቅድሚ ግን ባዕልና ንሕሖም ነርና ባዕልና ንከዋኖም ነርና ካብኡ ድማ በቃ ሓደ ሰብ ብባዕሉ ብሰናይ ተግባር ዘለዎ ማለት እዩ መፅኡ ይሕግዘና ነይሩ ሰርሕን አውዝ ሞፅለለው መፅ ይፈልጥ ሓደ ከተማ ንረእዮም ገለ መፅ እዚ ክሪኦም ተሎ ከም ዝብለሉ ንውላለ መፅ ገራ ሰሪሖም ገለ ይምፅልና ነይሮም
maybe Mike you can translate Mike in between go ahead. Sorry, I will stop and go ahead.
That's okay. I can listen to it at the same time. I can keep him up on it.
Okay.
That way we
ኩሉ ፀገም ምዃኑ ምንም ስለሌለ በቃ ነውልዑም ነስትዮም ምንም የለይ እዚ ሕና ልጣዕሚ ፀለውና ማለት እዩ ሕረስ የብሎም ማሽ የብሎም ኣስብላ የብሎም ሰርሕና ምግብታት ገለመታት ምንም የብልናይ ማለት እዩ
medication, the lack of food. She's describing how difficult it is to find food to feed them. So that's the hardest part.
ያው ኣብ ፀገም ወዲቖም ስለ ዝርከቡ ድማ ንስኻትኩም ሃብሒብኩም ናብ ንቡር ናብሮኦም ንክምለስኩም ትገብሩ ህፃናት ይርኢ ኣለኹ ኣረጋውያን ይርኢ ኣለኹ መናእሰይ ይርኢ ኣለኹ ኣብቲ ውሽጢ ድማ ኣብቲ በዓለም የንስሰርሐ
commanding them in a way but asking at the same time how hard they're working to keep up the spirit and keep up everybody he's talking about having different ages, children, middle-aged and elderly, and still
ብጣዕሚ ብዙሓት ሰባት ኢና ሪእና ሞ ጠቕላላ ኣብዚ ክንደይ ሰባት ኣለዉ
and he's asking we see quite a bit, so how many do you roughly think a number wise?
ህፃውንቱን ኣረግቱን ኩሎም ተሓዋዊሶም ማለት እዩ እና ከዚ በቃ ባላ መጥዮም ለውን እኮ ህፃ ኩሎም ተሓዋዊሶም እዮም ነው ህፃውንቲ ቶም ሽማግለታት ቶም ንኣእምሮ ሕሙማት በቃ ምንም ገዛ መፍለይ ምናምን ስለሌልና ሓደ እዮም ነው ማለት እዩ እና እዚ ችግር ነና ንሕና ካተን ተንሰር
ዓለም also describing the challenges separating age, gender, the level of illness, that you're not supposed to have them all mixed up like this, but there's not other options and means to facilitate by age, by the level of care they need, and whether it be physical or mentally and all those things.
ንበልና ዓይን ጉዳይ ፅቡቅ ኢና ንግንብል ሕማቅ ኣይንግንብልና እዚኣት ተሓባርና ፅቡቅ ኢልና
ክብረት ያበለይ ወይዘሮ አሰደብ ልቤ መስግን ስድራ እንደ አባይ አብርሃ ወይ እንደ አቢደራ ኣብዚ ዝግበር ዘሎ
So this is a clinic, actually, as Ephraim mentioned it, this was the clinic started by individual basically to provide care to the community. And they were not expecting the number to turn the way it is right now. But given the war that's been going on, a lot of these folks, they have nowhere else to go to. So that's kind of like why earlier, and I was containing my emotions, but at the same time, it's hard. And I don't think I have to translate, to be honest with you, for you to see and understand what you saw and how painful it is. So I'll just let you jump in and, and have your take on that.
Difficult to watch. Didn't know we were going to be watching that tonight, and I at the same time, I guess I'll use the word appreciate seeing it. I mean, I think it's speaks to what I was talking about before. As far as me experiencing like a deficit in terms of information and any kind of visual content coming out of the region, and to see that, I mean, it's pretty stark. And it's hard not to view that woman and other individuals involved in the care of those individuals as saints. I mean, that is as frontline work gets to provide for the survival of individuals. There was that focus before, you said, Mike, on the humanitarian aspect. I watched that, and I honestly wonder how I can help, and I reassess my own life in the process to when I see images like that, and I know that that there are people who are going through that and would not survive if it weren't for the intervention of those that were depicted. And even as I use the word survive, I mean, I don't know how long something like that can be sustained, especially if there's no humanitarian aid and medications coming through. If you compare it to something like a medical illness, this is medically necessary care that these individuals aren't receiving. So their quality of life, from their mental health to their physical health, to just their living conditions, that is a very dire picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as of right now, as we speak, there's a lot of war. Artillery are going in, not on the war front side, but on residential places. The air strike is daily. The drone attack is daily. They are not attacking the soldiers who are fighting, but they are attacking the civilians, residential places, hotels, just churches, mosques, just a lot of things. Earlier I said it's been 3 years, but it's been 2 years actual war, and then the first year was like blocking the roads. There's a lot of things going on, but so after all this war, the long term mental impact on the people of Tigray, what is going to be look like? What should we do to prevent this? On the mental part of it, especially on the long term. There is a lot of I'm sure we will have a lot of post traumatic stress disorder. There's a lot of people will see very graphic things, rape, all that. What's the long term mental effect on Tigray people?
Yeah, I mentioned before that, as your question suggests, since this is a future state of as far as like anticipation of that, and I think history can be instructive in that sense, as far as what's been learned or what's been observed from other genocidal events, or from other mass traumatic events that have happened either in the region or in other places. And when I invoke that example of the Jewish Holocaust during World War II, I'm aware of at least one research study that the researchers went and interviewed survivors of the Holocaust to assess them in a number of areas, but I think primarily for symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And stands to reason that in terms of what's known about the Holocaust and what's been the information available about that, especially from survivors, those are the conditions for the development of post-traumatic stress disorder. The hopeful aspect is that not all participants, as I understand it, met criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. So what is known about trauma and related illnesses is that not everyone responds the same way to events. And there are a number of reasons for that. Some of them are bundled into the category that has been described as protective factors, resilience, and again, going to other historical events to learn about some of the after effects of these kinds of atrocities can hopefully be instructive. When I see visuals that you just shared, I'm trying to remain hopeful that that there can be something resembling timely and effective mental health care delivered once that's possible. Certainly, I think the scale of it, like when Mike describes the millions of individuals in the region that don't have access to medications and food and education and so on, that scope of the problem sounds pretty profound.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, I think kind of what Dr. summed it up. To predict the future, obviously, it's difficult, but I think we're going to have a lot of people suffering from this, not having the ability to provide enough rehabilitation. Not to mention those who, in the hundreds of thousands, who are fighting also on the front line. We're talking like a human wave. Ethiopia confessed that it actually has lined up over 1 million people to fight this war. Over 1 million people. I mean, so and Eritrea is estimated somewhere in that 400,000 plus. We don't know the number. These are just what we're hearing, an estimated number. We do know that that combined between Ethiopia and Eritrea, it's estimated between 1.2 to 1.5 million people. Basically surrendering the Tigray region. Which obviously, brings me to the question of why is the world not understanding that this is the biggest conflict on the planet in 2022, but nobody, within the international community, is really willing to step in and take any meaningful action. So I just want to emphasize how this war is really elevated to the level where this last 50 days is the renewed attack, the artillery that's being used from the Eritrean regime into reigning cities and villages I mentioned earlier. This is devastating. These people who are living in the elderly who's lived in the previous 2 wars that have taken place, even within my lifetime. And imagine my older generation and my generation, the next generation, many of them are now living 2 wars. This is the 3rd war that I'm actually, the first one, the second one I was out of the country, of course, and the 3rd one I'm out of the country, but it impacts me directly because many of us in the diaspora, we have not been able to help our family, to know who within our family actually will be alive when this corridor opens up to Tigray, right? So even for us in the in the diaspora, we are traumatized by it. It is impacting us. It's just families are falling apart, and so we have had so far roughly about 5 or 6 Tigrayans in the United States that have lost from some of them have just actually, I know it's harsh to utilize the direct word, but taking their own life is the hardest thing to do, especially a person who's never had mental health issues, a person who is just normal, ordinary people, just like you guys and I, but they can't take it anymore. They can't handle what they seem, just kind of what you mentioned here. But the horrors that goes on Facebook and other, media platforms, actually, when you see people just bombs just falling on them like rains, it's devastating. So that's the least to say. But on the other hand, just recently, Eritrea and Ethiopia, a leaked story is that they say that the way you destroy Tigray and wipe, almost like literally dismantle the people to give in this fight is you prolong the war. You can, you don't just go in and destroy everything right away. You just continue the fight. You take your time. The longer it takes, the more people actually starve to death. So the using food as a way of a weapon isn't just what we're talking about, just dropping bombs and killing people within the territory that the Eritrean and Ethiopian military are operating.
I saw that there was mention in the chat. I mean, I don't disagree with the comments. I assume the ICC is a reference to The Hague. Is that correct? As far as some international involvement in raising some of this as war crimes?
So if I missed it, but the ICC would be the International Criminal Court, which really the process, as many of us knows, is that I say it by Mike Lowry. So the way that works, obviously, as we know, is the United Nations last December voted for 3 independent investigators. March of this year, funding was granted, and they went to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to go into the areas where the atrocities has taken place and the genocide. The Ethiopian authorities refused to allow those investigators to go into any of the fight in the Tigray region, Amhara region, the Afar region have taken place to have an independent investigation. Therefore, however, they're finding from satellite images, from telephone interviews, and other evidence that they did not, they should probably disclose that, but from the information they've got so far, they have stated it that there is a war crimes against humanity, and there's a video. Actually, I'll try to link it up here in a minute, but there's a clear video that shows a lot of these things in the Sudan, for example, where I visited last summer. Over nearly 70,000 women, children, and are suffering, just living in a makeshift and whatnot. So helping Tigrayans is to me is very sad, but it's not like just the people inside Tigray. Even outside Tigray, we have refugees in Kenya, in Djibouti, in Somalia, in Sudan. The majority of them being that close to 70,000. So it's unfortunate, obviously, the least to say, but the renewed fighting that have taken place in the last 50 days is supposedly to squeeze as many of the Tigrayans as possible and to make it this as a final ethnic cleansing. But the Ethiopian authorities came right back and say it was political motivation for the international community or the UN mandated investigators to say that there was enough evidence to allude that there's crimes against humanity, and food as a weapon is one of the description they use, how Ethiopia and Eritrea is using food as a weapon to starve people, which is crime against humanity.
Well, can I ask you both something? It's a sensitive question, but when you had posed it to me about what Americans know or what I know, there was a comment made earlier in this conversation about how even your children in school had a broad awareness or general awareness of what was going on in Ukraine. I obviously don't know the age of your children, but I wondered if what your conversations with them have been like about Tigray, and if you've had to raise their awareness about this. And again, I realize it's a sensitive question, but I wonder what that's like for both of you.
Yeah, I've had some conversation with all my neighbors, my coworkers, and representatives, senators, and mayors here in the United States and Washington State area. I have mentioned my concern. I'm sure, I'm so happy the world is reacting very quickly for Ukraine people. If not only responding, endorsing that it's genocide going on from by Russia, but also the help was very quick. For example, Swedish hospital CEO, what they have decided is they have sent multiple help, urgent care to help them. And also, if you are working at Swedish medical center and you have pledged or given $100, Swedish agreed to pay $100 for Ukraine. They match whatever you pay. There are a lot of surplus that they have decided to send to Ukraine. Medical supplies, voluntaries, and all that as cost of I'm talking about one organization in the United States. I'm not talking about the government. The government so far has sent about $54 billion for Ukraine. $54 billion. We haven't heard or received anything from any part of the world to Tigray. We work here. We are Americans. Our family are impacted by this war. They haven't even offered us whatever we send money to the people of Tigray. No one was able to match it. Nothing was. What we hear is so far concern. We are concerned about the Ethiopian war. What is concern? What is going to help me for my family? Our family are disconnected from the entire world. The bank system is closed. No internet, no electricity, no water. Like I showed you those, a lot of mental health. We will have more people who will be having some mental issues. So I don't know. Maybe Mike can add up something on this thing. But I have talked to Representative Larson in Snohomish County. I spoke to him. He was very helpful. And we asked him to pass the HR 6600. There are a lot of things that help us to the cessation of hostility. So all the fighters they can stop the war, and then they can talk around the table. Our government has already confirmed they are ready to talk with the Ethiopian government, but they wanted to get rid of us, the entire Tigray people, with the help of Eritreans and Turkey, Arab Emirates, all this for Tigray, for one region, one tribe, about 6 to 8 million people. In the next few months, I don't know what's going to happen. These people will be eradicated. And we are the world. We have signed the peace. We are working peacefully here. There is a lot of impact to me, my family, my kids, and everything. So this is not we're not talking about politics. I don't care if those politicians in Tigray are captured or they can serve justice. But I'm talking about the people of Tigray. The people of Tigray needs to be free from all this. It doesn't have to be a victim of the politics in between those Ethiopian government and Tigrayan region. What we need is humanitarian aid, humanitarian access. The World Food Program needs to have unfettered access to Tigray. We need to have medical supplies. This is what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Korb, let me answer your question very, very short. And I think, Ephraim has explained the different things that we need help, obviously, and broadly. But your question is clearly what has been our communication to our children. And I can tell you this, thousands and thousands of Tigrayans around the globe, not just in the United States, but around, throughout the international community, have sat down with their children, not once, not twice, multiple times to recoup. And actually, it sounds interesting, but the children actually are more brave than the adults. The children actually know more about the impact of this war on Tigray than the adults. And the reason behind it is that many of them, the young people born in the diaspora, actually have been the champions of the activism, the protests on the streets of the United States of America and the streets of Europe and Australia and Canada. So as far as how has been the discussion and the approach is that it's been reversed. The young people has been the ones approaching the grown-up ones and reassuring them things will be all right, that they just have to be patient because they, the technology is evolved to a point where many information is available on our fingertip nowadays. So the younger generation actually has more accessibility to technology, to information, unlike our older generation. So because of that, the younger generation is more informed, including children. I'm talking about, some of the kids that I see at a protest on a stroller, barely speaks, but knows about Tigray genocide, knows what's happening in Tigray. They're integrated into it, and it's painful, the least to say, but they're fully aware and more than aware what's happening. And regarding the question that you had about the ICC, this is kind of the reference what people were trying to comment. So this is the Human Rights Commission reporters, 3 of them, independent investigators that's supposed to go and investigate the atrocities that have taken place. And the Ethiopian Authority have refused to allow them to go for independent investigation, because if you commit the crime, you wouldn't want to be caught with a crime to be charged. So it's a long video, but I'll just play a few of it. And then, because, I realize we've been at it for a little long, so we don't want to hold you too long. So if I may, you can hear, I don't know if you've heard about this yet, but this is kind of the beginning of this atrocity that's happening. And some of the reference they made is that the inconclusive information that they have, it's to be determined for future investigation, but the team has not landed into the location where most of the atrocity have taken place in the Tigray region in the past 23 months. But I'm going to play this real quick.
To all parties to provide the Commission with unhindered access.
Apologize.
And the goodwill expressed during our mission. We deeply regret that the federal government did not grant the Commission access to any areas outside of Addis Ababa. Mr. President, Excellencies, the Commission has conducted an in-depth investigation into 3 incidents and 2 thematic areas. The incidents examined were the shelling of Mekelle on 28 November 2020 and subsequent attacks on civilians and civilian objects. 2, killings in Kobo and Chena in late August and early September 2021. And 3, a drone strike on a camp for internally displaced persons in Dedebet on 7th January 2022. The themes examined were rape and sexual violence and the denial and obstruction of humanitarian access. Following the practices of other investigative mechanisms that were not granted access, the Commission interviewed 185 victims, survivors, witnesses, and other key interlocutors. 104 were women, and girls, and 81 were men and boys. The Commission wishes to express respect for and appreciation to the survivors, victims, and witnesses who came forward to provide their testimonies at potential risk to themselves. The Commission also examined additional sources, including satellite imagery.
So that's, to just save time for us here. You kind of heard it, like, 185 interviews they've done, satellite images, which I've been, in the English program, and I've been talking about it in multiple occasions, obviously. So I've listened to it's about 24-minute report that they did. It's sickening. Simply, you heard her, the commission, she's one of the chief prosecutor, by the way, in the International Criminal Court, the ICC. And, she talked about the Ethiopian authorities will not allow them to go outside the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. But we know where the war is happening. We know where the genocide is happening. So yeah, clearly, if you commit the crime, you wouldn't want investigators to go and investigate the crime that you committed, because you'll be charged with the crime. So that's sort of what we're dealing with, and I think, and I guess for us to sum it up in our discussion is that the very best that we can do is to continue to approach humanitarian. This is really, aside from any politic, because when civilians are used as a target to bomb, food and medicine is prevented from entering to civilians to be saved from slowly but surely dying, just from the simple, the fundamental human rights for you and I and any of us to live. We have the right to live as human beings. And Ethiopian authorities, Eritreans, are saying the Tigrayans don't have the right to live. And if this is not clear to the international community, what would be? What would be then in the world that, what we're going to see, like 5 to 6 million Jewish perish in the 19th century. And we are in the 21st century. And we're talking close to 8 million people in the Tigray region potentially could be wiped out. And we hear it, we see it. And when we cry for help, it doesn't seem the world understands it. I think they understand it, but cares, I guess. And now it's expanded to the Horn of Africa. And I will say this very quickly. Within Ethiopia, there's fighters within Kumant and Ago community that are located in the Amhara region. You have the Beshangul region, its own region. You have Gambela, its own region. The Oromo region, it's Oromia region rather. You have an Oromo Liberation Army that's fighting pretty heavily. And then Al-Shabaab is 150 kilometers inside Ethiopia from Somalia. Then in the last 2 days, Djibouti has crossed into the Ethiopian border called the Afar region. So fighting is taking place between Djibouti, the country Djibouti, and Afar within Ethiopia. And then just yesterday, Djibouti has massively deployed troops into the Eritrean border because Djibouti fears that Eritrea may potentially invade Djibouti in its border. So this conflict actually would widen, and Sudan is mentioned in some reports also, certain areas. We know that Sudan has also entered into disputed areas last year. So the entire Horn of Africa, when you don't have stability, when you don't have safety and security, I think that's when the international community will realize that we know that 80% of the trade flows through the the Mediterranean, the Red Sea. And if the Horn of Africa is not stabilized, I'm afraid that we are headed to the worst crisis that we are ignoring, where it's easily preventable.
So, what do you think about the international communities, Dr. Ryan? And what's your message for the people of Tigray and the international community? As a doctor, as an advocate of vulnerable people, we are the vulnerable. We are the world. So what's your message for the international community and the people of Tigray?
The message would be focusing on what Mike had mentioned before and what you were saying, Ephraim. I just want to try to echo, which is that this is a humanitarian crisis, the effects of which we still haven't entirely seen. We don't know what the long-term effects will entirely be. But on Mike's last point, from my perspective, I think that he's correct, that if this is not addressed, if this is not contained, this has the opportunity to be far more widespread in that region, expanding, negatively impacting even more millions of people than have already been impacted at this point, which will be compounded by some factors we haven't even talked about, including climate change, and other scarcities that are becoming more common. That is certainly a scary thought, and I hesitate to say that. But unfortunately, there is evidence that if this goes unchecked, if this goes unaddressed, I would tend to agree with Mike that is a distinct possibility, unfortunately. And so my plea, as that powerful video, that footage that you showed, Ephraim, is that people are suffering. This needs attention. This deserves attention. It has not gotten the attention that it deserves. And once again, it has been a privilege here to be able to be some small piece of what you two gentlemen are doing on a regular basis. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. I think, Mickey, if you have something to say, I have keeping him for about an hour now. Our show will be ended soon. If you have something to say, I'll give you some time and then we can conclude our show. You are muted.
Oh, I was just like, thank you, Ephraim, and thank you, Dr. Quirk. Appreciate you. I know some of the videos, it's hard to watch, obviously, from earlier what you said. I want to, both of you, I want to invite you, if you are able to, and if you are on Twitter, this Sunday, the 16th, the picture that I'm showing here, this gentleman, he goes by Peter, based in the UK, is going to be hosting the Tigray conflict in Ethiopia, political analyst. And I know that my last name there's a typo on the bottom, but if you see the co-host, there's an amazing woman in the UK, and I will be the co-host of this discussion on Sunday. And it's focused on the Tigray conflict that we're talking about. So I just wanted to, before we conclude our discussion, if you guys are able, the way Twitter works nowadays, as you all know, is, anybody and everybody who's got an account can jump in. And then as we see people that are coming, want to give a comments and feedbacks in the Tigray conflict, obviously, we would bring them to the mic and give them an opportunity to have a say. So a little bit different than what we do live media, but just wanted to throw that out there before we conclude our discussion for today.
Okay. Once again, thank you so much for the invitation, Mike. We will join you Sunday. Please text us the link on Twitter. And Cyber Power of Tigray Media is always behind the people of Tigray, the people of Ethiopia and Eritrea, not with the governments who are doing the evil stuff. So we are not talking about politics. We are talking about the humanitarian issues here. So everybody who are willing to come to advocate the people of Tigray, all people of the Horn of Africa, to have a peaceful and the cessation of hostility, please join us and contact me directly and say something about this. Please contact your local representatives to help us vocalize it, verbalize it, and to start aid for the people of Tigray, to stop the war, and mentally, physically, and everything, we can heal. We are very, very sick. We are drained out now. It's been 2 years, mentally, physically, and everything because of this war. Thank you so much, Dr. Ryan, for being with us here today. And thank you so much, Mickey. And have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.